Today on The Mighty Peculiar, our topic is, was Pearl Harbor an inside job?
Today on The Mighty Peculiar, our topic is, was 9/11 an inside job?
We're also going to talk about Pearl Harbor and where did the conspiracy theory originate from?
We're also going to talk about 9/11 and where did the conspiracy theory originate from?
Guys, this is really obnoxious. I don't like this opening at all. So I'm just going to say, you're listening and watching The Mighty Peculiar.
You're listening and watching The Mighty Peculiar.
The Mighty Peculiar.
Why you got to copy me?
Why you got to copy me?
Why you got to copy me?
Mighty Peculiar.
Hey, everybody. It's great to see everybody again. Welcome. And always great to be here with my incredible friend and co-host, Tinfoil Matt. And Matt, I know that you've had a hell of a week doing research for the show. So What do we have on the docket today?
Today, we're talking about Pearl Harbor and 9/11 and the copy and paste nature of the conspiracy theory about whether they were an inside job. There's some striking similarities, let's say, between these two events, and not between the events, but really between what people have decided is the reason the events happened.
I'm really looking forward to that, as you know, Matt, because I deployed right after 9/11, and I have a special hard place in my heart for 9/11 truthers. So I'm very excited about this today.
Yeah, so we're going to get into it, but first, let's do the usual business here about liking the episode, subscribing to the channel, turning on notifications. That's for you YouTubers. For you audio podcast listeners on your preferred platform, if you could rate the show and write a review, that would be wonderful. Again, preferably 5 stars, but you know what? You're free to do what you want, except you're not free to not do it, because see, if you don't do it, we're going to send you to Cuba and make you be our false flag so we can invade Cuba.
Oh my goodness. I actually sort of want to take that trip myself, Matt.
Pack your bags.
Might be a lot. That actually might be a lot of fun, right? To head to Cuba. But no, it might be great. I love the old cars there. And, I would love to be there. So no, This is really exciting topic for me this week. I think with what we're seeing in the news with the people even running for president, like Vivek Ramaswamy, who really likes to ride that edge of conspiracy theories, specifically 9/11, which on his interview not too long ago, which really, got under my skin. Yeah. But, you had people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and other people, I still think, that ascribe to the fact that some part of 9/11 might be an inside job. So I'm really interested to hear what you had to learn about Pearl Harbor. I know a little bit about that, obviously, but I got a feeling you're going to surprise me today.
Well before we were even doing the show, this is something you and I have kind of talked about, the fact that the theories surrounding them are so similar. And honestly, this also kind of echoes an episode we did, the one about UFOs. We called that one The Song Remains the Same, right? Because
that's right.
When you got those initial reports, they're almost verbatim what any modern reports are. You just change out some of the details. Well, we kind of got that same thing happen here. So if that one was called The Song Remains the Same, I like to call this one History Defeats Truthers.
Well, God, I think it does. Today being, we're taping in the week of 9/11.
Yeah.
I mean, that's honestly what we're doing. So I think the Pearl Harbor 9/11 truther type of similarities are so important to continue to investigate, because the best thing about our show, again, and I know I've said this every week, is we're translating history into the present day.
Right.
And the big difference for us is that we're actually able to meet that digital metastasization of conspiracies on a playing ground here digitally, because we're trying to refute it on these same platforms that they came out at times, like YouTube and other things. So again, this is near and dear to me, especially with my deployment, especially the fact we're in the week of 9/11. But also, really have I have a tough time sometimes emotionally with 9/11 during this week. And I know I try not to go out there and say that or be performative about it. But 9/11 is a very tough week for me. it really changed my family's life and it changed my life.
So what I wanted to do first was just to kind of talk about, I know we don't need to go over the details of the attack on Pearl Harbor, nor do we have to go over the details of the attacks on 9/11. That's unfortunately very well known history. But what I wanted to say in the lead up is kind of where we were as a country just prior to both events, right? Because I think the similarities actually do precede the events themselves. So just prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, we are coming out of the Depression. We're still kind of in it, obviously, but the economy is doing better, and Europe is at war. But we in America are still trying to be as non-interventionist, but still intervening, I guess would be the way to put it, right? Like,
we certainly had isolationist tendencies. If you're thinking about at that point, even with a lot of the major, I would say, lobbying groups or a lot of the major groups in the United States at the time certainly tended toward an isolationist stance rather than getting involved in what was going on in Europe at the time.
Right. So say the America First Committee.
Yes.
What was interesting about America First during the 40s, right, a pre-Pearl Harbor attack, is you had your Lindberghs that were, let's say, sympathetic, if not outright openly supporting Germany. But you also had your pacifists that would be part of America First. So if you're supporting Germany and you're part of America First, I'm not calling that a good faith argument. I feel like that's rooting for an enemy,
Nazis.
even if they weren't a declared enemy at the time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, rooting for Nazis.
If you're a pacifist, again, I'm trying my best to extend an olive branch in that sense, right?
You know what it is, Matt? Just like today, if you have some people that are part of a movement, but they're part of the other part of the movement, but still the overarching movement has nefarious purposes, or, it would be hard for me to say, hey, I'm a Quaker, so I'm an America First because of the, pacifist side of me. However, I still belong to this group that supports Hitler. Yeah, I don't, it's tough for me to actually have to break that apart just based on sometimes who you spoon with is who you spoon with, right? If you're either the big spoon or the little spoon, I don't think it matters at that point, right? If you say, well, I'm here for a different reason, it's very difficult to still, I would say, rationalize, well, yeah, you're a pacifist, but are you really a pacifist if you support Hitler? Or you're in a group that supports Hitler? And I think there's a lot of people who try to parse that, that maybe that might be an excuse. They might be hiding under the pillow from really why they're a part of some of these groups. But it's just I guess an observation for what I've seen with some of these individuals. And you know what? That's totally fair, because we'll talk about a guy named John Thomas Flynn. All right. Okay. And don't get too worked up on the Flynn last name. I looked, there's no connection. I was like, wow, that would be pretty crazy, actually. Although I did find, just as a quick aside for Doug, who is listening, the guy that we're going to talk about, his son is credited for helping save New York from bankruptcy in the 1970s. His son is crazy. Flynn. So anyways, there you go. A little New York trivia for you. Anyways, John Thomas Flynn is a journalist in the 1930s. Okay. He's a pacifist. He initially supports FDR for president. He described himself as a leftist with populist inclinations, which is a word salad that I'm like, I get what he's going for, but it also kind of means nothing. It feels very hard to pin down, because it's almost like Trump, right? Trump likes to use populist rhetoric. Yeah, I'm not trying to piss off anybody, but it seems like some people try to define Bernie Sanders that way, if you remember. Yeah, no, exactly. And again, whether sincere or not is almost not really the issue. Because here you got a case where this guy is going to go on to be the co-founder of America First, but he's a pacifist, initially an FDR supporter.
and very much from the left wing, maybe even more left initially than FDR, right? Because, again, the knock on FDR, despite how radical, a lot of the New Deal was, he was still too close to bankers and too close to corporate types and
Ooh, it sounds a little globalist-y, right?
I mean,
it sounds a little anti-Semitic already when you're talking, but go ahead.
You're right. Exactly.
That sounds a little bit New World Ordery.
It's amazing how, again, we keep butting up against this where things that like are always talked about as like brand new or like, oh, shocking revelation, on InfoWars. And it's like, no, there's like in the 1930s, they were totally doing this already. Like none of your scoops are scoops is what I'm trying to say to conspiracy theorists.
That's right. And what was the guy's full name again?
It's John Thomas Flynn. So John P. Flynn is how he would be. I know, John Thomas. I know what you're going to do.
No. I'm not going to do anything.
No, you're not going to dick lock this guy? Okay. All right.
I want to dick lock him so bad, but that sounded awful. I don't know that. Anyway, there's a lot of layers. But I think, what's interesting is that we talk about conspiracy theorists. It seems like the last name Flynn is also, sort of connected from World War II to today. But go ahead, my friend.
Well, and again, when I saw this guy's name pop up, the immediate thing I did was like, is there any way this guy has, a connection?
I know you did.
And he doesn't, but that was my immediate thought. I'm like, all right. But so he, again, initially he supports FDR. In 1930, the 1932 election, but by 36 he is anti-FDR.
Okay.
He's kind of soured on the New Deal. Now he's thinking that FDR is representing creeping fascism but he's thinking about it from a left-wing perspective, right? Like, so he's worried about the militarization basically of Again, I hesitate to do this, but a little bit to his credit. So in the lead up to Pearl Harbor, he is a non-interventionist. Okay. And
all right.
That I had to think about for a second and I double checked, but there is a difference between non-interventionist and isolationist. Those are terms that you will see sometimes, substitute for one another. But a non-interventionist is totally on board usually with like diplomatic or some other kinds of involvement in the world.
Okay.
Whereas an isolationist is like Fortress America, just moats with gators and like no one gets it, right? So he's part of America First. He co-founded it, but he's still he's again, more a non-interventionist, which might explain why when the attack on Pearl Harbor happens, John Flynn is the one to advocate to the group at large, the America First Committee, we need to dissolve.
Now, the America First Committee, I know we're talking about John
Thomas Flynn.
John Thomas Flynn. Sorry, to Michael Flynn. I'm sorry. That must have been, what a slip that was.
Yeah, Michael
So
Flynn.
John Thomas Flynn, sorry, that was just a bad layered joke again. I'm just hitting them, one after another today. But so we have John Thomas Flynn. But America First, they're the way they presented themselves, brother, when you talk about the America First Committee, you're talking about World War II, was decidedly pro-Germany and pro-fascism, which is interesting to me when you're talking about John Thomas Flynn, as a pacifist, right, or as a Bernie Sanders type, right?
And someone who feared fascism.
It's just an interesting dynamic to me. But go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. It's an interesting dynamic because we know, America First Committee, you automatically, what is the first person you think about in the America First Committee is Lindbergh.
Yeah.
For me. Right?
And that rally.
And the rally, right? The America First rally, to say that that's not Nazi symbolism or not overtly Nazi in everything that was going on. That's why this is really interesting about Flynn. World War II Flynn.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's the thing is if you do an image search just on America First, the results are going to be shots of like the packed Madison Square Garden. This is their peak.
But he was there when it happened. If John Thomas Flynn was part of America First during the Madison Square Garden, Nazi display, right, which is decidedly anti-Semitic. Let's just get that out of the way right now. America First Committee, and before World War II, during that time was anti-Semitic, pro-fascist, globalist type of conspiracy theories. The same type of shite we see today, which is, I love your research on this, by the way, Matt. So the same type of stuff. But even if he's identifying as a leftist populist pacifist, he's in a very rightist fascist organization that symbolizes everything we despise today about human beings.
Yeah, exactly. And that is also, it does bring us to some of the discussions that you find happening now too, which is like, at what level do you make alliances with people that you have different worldviews from because you are against like a common enemy? We see this a lot, in the era of Trump, where there are, Republicans and Democrats that would normally be at odds, forming alliances. You see that, like, in a way, I feel like that's where Flynn got into, with America First. His intention was to bring not a pro-fascism or pro-German side. His was bringing the anti-war for the anti-war the way you think of anti-war, like the peacenik side, basically, right?
Well, I can't imagine what the planning meeting was like with John Thomas Flynn and the Nazis when you're talking about Madison Square Garden, number one. Number two, we're looking at this in hindsight. But for me, the one thing that I always use as I would say a separating function or an indicator or something where I wouldn't join a group, I would say that that one discriminator would be, I'm not joining a group with Nazis.
Yeah. I think that's that
would be my discriminator. You, John Thomas, and they're like, hey, I'm a pacifist, guys, but I understand all that Nazi stuff, and I know there's a bunch of globalists, and I think the Jews are running the world, but I'm a peacenik. My true feelings about John Thomas Flynn, though, are this, if I may.
Oh.
If I knew him then in hindsight, I think I'd want to drag this guy through the woods and bury him somewhere, because I think he's an evil rat bastard. That's really where I'm at when it comes to people like that, when you're talking about anything that was sort of connected to these individuals during World War II. But go ahead.
I would say tell us how you really feel, but I think you just did. Okay. So, okay. The shred of credit that I give him, which is eroding very fast because Denver is very convincing, is the idea that the attack on Pearl Harbor happens, and he does advocate for America First to disband, and they do, formally anyways. Now, again, we've mentioned, I think, in the past that, Charles Lindbergh famously basically went to FDR and said, put me in, coach. Like, let me go fly. And the FDR is like, yeah, nah, it's all right, man. Yeah. You're good. So Flynn kind of did the same thing. But again, from a civilian journalist perspective, he was on board with the war effort. So in that is definitely different than what we see today. But now what's going to happen is FDR is going to run for re-election for the fourth and final time in 1944, right? So we're a couple of years past Pearl Harbor. This is when Flynn just decides to unleash his pamphlet of fury called The Truth About Pearl Harbor. And this is where we get it was all an inside job. FDR knew and let it happen, all that. And you know what? To kind of echo a little bit of what we talked about last week with media complicity, guess how he got to spread the word?
It had to be a big-ass newspaper.
Something called the Chicago Tribune, with a guy named Robert McCormick, who was very anti-Roosevelt, printed the entire 25-page initial pamphlet in the lead up to the 44 election against Dewey.
How incredible is that piece of news for people listening to this? It should, if people didn't already know this, Matt, you're exactly right. It seems like we have picked up on a theme, not only, the fact that credulity and, conspiracies are part of our historical makeup, right? That people like to mine the ignorant, the susceptibility of the masses to this type of stuff, but that the media certainly has a massive role to play in some of the worst things or some of the most bizarre things we've seen in history in our society. And the Chicago Tribune is no different.
No, not at all.
Now, in this pamphlet, Matt, did you have some allusions or some, my guess is that FDR's relationship with large corporations, banks, things like that were probably part of the reason that Pearl Harbor was allowed to happen, that FDR knew.
Yep, because again, what this comes down to is it's all the economy, right? It's a way to like get people super wealthy by being on the war footing, all the manufacturing, all of that, right? It's also it fills in, and this is where we're going to see, I think, one of our first real similarities to like the reaction to 9/11 was Pearl Harbor. It seems to be the logical conclusion to what the public thought FDR wanted anyways, or his critics thought he wanted, right?
Which is war.
He wanted to go to war. That's what they all said. It was always that. And so here comes this perfect scenario that gets his war. And that's, one of the first criticisms I ever heard leveled against George W. Bush post 9/11 was, well, he was looking for an excuse to go to war. Right.
It's exactly right. And, some of the, I know we're not jumping there. And the reason that the globalist banker connection with FDR is really something that really spoke to me, right, as far as conspiracy theories, is when you look at 9/11, a lot of people thought the Mossad, right, was behind this. Israel was actually behind the attacks in some way as part of the inside job, or that they knew beforehand, right? And we allowed it to happen because George W. Bush wanted war anyway. So there's a lot of those similarities that are so one-to-one. They're on the nose one-to-one when you're talking about why somebody wants war like FDR in World War II and why Bush in 9/11. I know we're not to 9/11 yet.
Right.
But again, I just want to explain to people, when I know so much about 9/11 trutherism and, the World War II thing, which I've known some about, is even some of the anti-Semitic tropes or some of the issues of FDR wanting war, the fact that he knew beforehand, that he already had some agreements in place. All those things really do line up as almost a one-to-one for 9/11, which is really, really, really exciting. Not exciting in a like, oh, I'm excited about conspiracy theories, but it's exciting to see those connections between conspiracy theories.
And again, for me, much like the UFO one, for me, I feel like when you find the parallels that are so drawn so close that they're no longer parallels, they're just kind of overlapping. I feel like that gives more credence to the skeptical side of it, right? Like I've called this the copy and paste between two events. I've described it as like, the people writing the initial 9/11 was an inside job. All they did was open a Word document, hit find, typed in Pearl Harbor, replace 9/11. It was like they didn't have to change any of the language. So last thing I kind of about Pearl Harbor itself, just because I know this is going to come up, is I didn't want to belabor like the actual attack, but it's in the attack where some of the what people consider the most perplexing choices were made or in the lead up to the attack. So, for example, all of the planes on Pearl Harbor were out in the open and they were wingtip to wingtip, all lined up, right? And so people look at that and go, well, yeah, why would they ever do that? Because that makes them hard to get up into the air. You got to maneuver them all away from each other. It makes them easy targets because you hit one and set off an explosion, it's going to hit a bunch. Similarly, some of the battleships, right, they weren't all spread out across Pearl Harbor. They were all clustered together. And people look at that and say, see, they were easy targets, intentionally made easy targets. Now,
and go ahead. I'm sure that you have some rebuttals to that.
I was just going to ask you,
I do.
I'm assuming you probably either know or have a good theory on why it would be set up like that.
First of all, sometimes people don't make great decisions, right? Especially if you think you're safe. If you're talking about aircraft, and the way they're lined up, you do have maintenance issues, right? You have maybe some are going to depot. But the thing is that how many aircraft were actually on the tarmac? It could be that just as for storage and for convenience of reaching each of those aircraft, maybe for refueling or things like that, that's why they were lined up. There's nothing nefarious about an aircraft not being in a combat ready posture.
Right.
That's the first thing. When you're talking about, Hawaii itself, you're talking about Pearl Harbor and the ships that were there, depot maintenance, you're talking about maybe you had a massive amount of military activity, or you had leave, or you had boats that, as far as the schedule, that were coming in and out at the same time. It's always easy to backwards rationalize what the planning looked like when you have a surprise attack.
Yes.
That came from Japan. When you have that kind of preparation that Japan had for that day, knowing all of our ship movements, doing the work, the intel, plus there was another thing that people forget about the United States at that point at Pearl Harbor, and it's one word: hubris. Nobody's going to attack us.
Right.
Nobody's going to attack us. And so hubris, arrogance, lack of mission planning or military planning, time that maybe a lot of those aircraft were in some type of maintenance mode. It could be that they were just about to transfer them to different tarmacs. We don't know, or into actual hangars. We don't know, right? I don't know at this point. I'd have to go back and look. I'm sure there's some historians might listen to this. Well, Denver, the reason they were parked that way is because of that. But also when you're talking, go ahead, but also ships. Maybe there's just too many damn ships that day. And the reason they were lined up that way is because there's a lot of logistics and operations that were happening that day on the ships, whether in maintenance, going in and out. You had shore leave. Maybe they had to leave at that time. Maybe there were some weather hiccups. There were some weather delays. To automatically assume there's a conspiracy theory is the same freaking folks who said that metal can't melt at 9/11, or the same people who think every noise in the woods is Bigfoot when it's actually a squirrel. Yeah. That's I guess the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. All of the experienced people in charge said, like, this is too far for them to attack. That's right. Too much.
Remember,
they're going to attack. If they're going to attack us, they're going to hit us in the Philippines. So the Philippines was where it looked like if anyone was predicting an actual attack, that's where they were thinking. So
hubris.
So yeah, exactly. Now, the other big thing, and this is again, and from here we can take this point and then carry it right over to 9/11, right? So one of the biggest things was the idea that the US had intercepted code from the Japanese and interpreted it. And it said attack was coming. That's kind of a falsehood. I mean, yes, they had intercepted and translated code, but it was diplomatic code. It was not military code.
Of course not.
And the diplomatic code was weird. So again, it was all like things were bubbling up, but there was no specific actionable intelligence that said there was nothing. They never intercepted something that was like Pearl Harbor at this time, like nothing like that. So,
what gets me, Matt, on that is that there's this automatic assumption that the United States government is willing to sacrifice thousands of people in order for some kind of that it's a micro problem to sacrifice people for the macro goal or objective of getting into war or some other nefarious plot of the United States government and the deep state. And again, I find it so exhausting as somebody who's in the military and things like that to think, right, that in Pearl Harbor or 9/11, that the United States government was willing to sacrifice the economic center of the United States to go to war. Because now what they're guessing is that somehow the United States government knew all the cascading effects of that awful thing that happened, like the shutdown of airspace, our economy, right? Everything that you're talking about, the fire departments, the police departments, first responders, what happened at the Pentagon, right? Flight 93, that somehow they could dictate and predict all the ripple effects of this awful decision-making of getting America into war by sacrificing our economic center and the people that are in those buildings, just like Pearl Harbor. Right. And when those people bring up this bullshit, it's stunning to me that they don't drown when they look up during a rainstorm. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? Yeah. And we have smart people that are professionals that say this kind of stuff sometimes. So sorry about the Denver Riggleman rant of justice here, but for the love of God, you got people who actually believe that. I don't know. Is it time to bring back electroshock therapy? I mean, are we there, for these kind of individuals? I mean, I think it almost, do we drag them into sort of a dungeon-like and then spray them with water and then hook electrodes up to them and say, listen, heal, because you're an idiot.
Can we exercise the demon of stupidity? Is I think
I mean, stupidity is a bigger threat than badness. I mean, evil, my friend. Stupidity is the biggest threat we frickin' face. Are the closeted morons that stumble around the light, right, and wonder if they're actually living in a dome. I'm sorry, man. I'm pissed off now.
Okay, well, so I'm trying to think. Off. Okay, all right. Let me see. Let me see if I can do something here.
Despise truthers.
Well, okay.
Go ahead.
So, let's move to 9/11, right? And one of the
let's.
I'm sorry. That was less the transition that I wanted, but it's the one we've got. Which is, I think, kind of something that Rumsfeld said. But but anyways, so why I brought up the intercepting the Japanese diplomatic code as the last point about Pearl Harbor was, again, now infamously, especially thanks to, what was it, Fahrenheit 9/11, the Michael Moore documentary, Condoleezza Rice said to repeat what the intelligence report or the intelligence briefing that they got was about, like, bin Laden intent to attack the United States. And that's seen as like that gotcha moment that a lot of the truthers will, like, really start latching onto, right? And when you really look at it, it doesn't look that different than intercepting the Japanese diplomatic code. Yes, you're getting a report, you're getting intelligence. Yes, there is factual stuff, there is accurate stuff, but no one is handing anyone that's saying, okay, on this day, here's this. It's like, again, because now in the immediate post 9/11, time, some of the criticism about, like, how could you not see this coming? It's like, well, what they saw coming was a potential attack, but again, there was no belief that the attack was going to happen on U.S. soil. There was going to be an embassy attacked, right? Much like Japan would never come to Pearl Harbor. It was that there, if anything, if they're guilty of anything, it's that failure of imagination, right? That
maybe hubris,
right?
Maybe hubris, and maybe And listen, guys, intel is an imperfect science. I know people, I look at ones and zeros. You guys know what I do in the counterterrorism world, data analytics, algorithmic warfare. But when you're talking about people think about January 6th and the intelligence we had there and how, you had some analysts say it was aspirational. Can you imagine in 2000, 2001 thinking that a terrorist group, an Islamic terrorist group, an Islamic extremist can somehow plan flying airplanes, would actually have the guts and the planning capability? And let's be honest, a lot of it was just underestimating their intelligence and underestimating their conviction to the cause. There was a massive intelligence failure, massive operations failure, massive logistics failure, which you can actually read in the 9/11 report.
Right.
If people would want to actually read the damn thing instead of, as you said, Matt, latching on to some slob making a documentary, right, in Fahrenheit 9/11. So, I mean, I guess that would be, always consider your source, right, when you're looking at this, but also always consider that that even intelligence agencies, all the resources that we have, can't take away hubris, can't take away blind spots, mirror imaging, not understanding the data, or not even understanding, what could happen based on what you're saying, not having the predictive capability, because we had never dealt with anything like that before. The closest being what? The 93 World Trade Center bombing, right? And then back to Pearl Harbor. That's it.
Yeah.
It's all 95 at McVeigh, right? When you had domestic terrorism there, you have obviously some incidents, but can you imagine being an intel analyst and you think you're connecting the dots? And you're not quite sure what that means, but it's actually airplanes that are going to fly into buildings. I mean, it's a really, really tough nut to crack.
Yeah. And also just think of a matter of, again, sometimes one of the problems with when you say like a failure of imagination, part of it is also just the idea that like, okay, take the 93 World Trade Center bombing, which was a very small operation, right? And 8 years later, scale it up to what we ended up seeing. It's like, I think most people wouldn't think that that was a leap that could be made. Not in that time, not in that, especially. And then also to think of the World Trade Center again, it's like there was some level of just like, why would it be the target again? Right? Like,
Matt, I was an intelligence officer on September 10th, 2001.
So you got something.
I was an intelligence officer the day after because I deployed 10 days after 9/11. I was an intelligence officer. We saw intel. There's no way. Now, I was at the operational squadron level. I'm not the strategic intelligence level. So I'm not trying to make that somehow I was sitting at the Office of Secretary of Defense, or I'm sitting in, the DNI, or I'm sitting in CIA or NSA at the time. I was just looking at intel. I was consuming intel to brief to pilots, threat systems, things like that.
Right.
But I can promise you there was not one intelligence officer on our base up to the highest ranking intelligence individual at Mountain Home Air Force Base that thought that somehow airplanes were going to go into buildings at the World Trade Center. It just wasn't. There's no way nobody would attack us like that. How dare they? We're the United States of America. So anyhow, just some of the things. Sorry, some of my stream of consciousness thoughts on being in intel for so long. I guess I've seen the failures. I've had my own issues where I had intel, but I couldn't put it together because I didn't have the other piece.
Yeah.
Or I didn't understand the context. I didn't understand the ones and zeros that were coming at me. So I had to try to parse it the best I could. And sometimes I'm wrong.
Right.
That's not an infrared detector. That was actually thermal, or, there's all these things where you're like, oh shit, I was wrong. Yeah. I could have put my pilots in harm's way. I could have put people in harm's way. It's a tough job. And I'm not making excuses, for people who had, literal failures of imagination, as you said, in intelligence gathering, but it's hard. And to automatically go to conspiracy theory, I think a lot of these people are trying to explain a life where there's bad people, and they're trying to attribute some massive, coordinated, intricate, smarter, bad, globalist, New World Order, can't control our circumstances to just bad people doing bad things that we didn't catch in time.
Right. Well, and it's worth pointing out that while I don't think they would be so upfront to say this, it does seem like there are a lot of people in the 9/11 truther movement and various movements similar that secretly enjoy that these events happen, not for like the loss of life or anything like that, but because for them, it's a validating moment, right? It's a whole new way for them to say, see, I was right. All of this stuff that I've been ranting about this whole time. Look, it happened. Look, this guy, we got a president now whose dad was president, and his dad went after Saddam Hussein. It didn't get him. So all this guy came into office only wanting to do that. Let's forget that his whole before 9/11 was all domestic. He had no foreign policy really. He was a domestic focused president. Let's ignore all of that and let's just go back to the idea that I've been telling you since his dad was president. Now he's president. It's all because of Saddam.
I think, buddy, it's an incredible segue, Matt. That's because you know what? I think, the supposed WMDs in Iraq really could fuel the 9/11 truth or conspiracy theories because, the government briefed intelligence that might have been directly, contrary to what was happening on the ground and did do that. Let's not say Mike, they did do that. Right. Colin Powell obviously embarrassed him to the day he died. And so I think whenever you have massive mistakes or a manipulation that way at any level, it really does fuel larger and much more intricate conspiracy theories, specifically if, let's just be honest, right? The baseline for Pearl Harbor 9/11 is false flag.
Oh, yes. Yeah. 100%.
Baseline.
Yes.
These are false flags run by government agencies or government individuals in the know that allowed it to happen for a specific objective.
So you mentioned the I feel like we're going to do the balloons should come down, like you said, the magic words, because you said false flag. And what this will bring up, because I did threaten to send some people to Cuba.
I heard that. That was scary. I love Cuba.
And
though.
you're probably wondering how we go from Hawaii and New York and stuff, but like where Cuba factors in. Well, because we need to kind of split the difference. And in 1962, have you heard of something called Operation Northwoods?
Of course. And I knew, and this is why the segue, what you're doing is absolutely brilliant, because you're talking about, I've always said that false flags are the bastion of the most ignorant conspiracy theorists. But the reason they're so easy is because, well, my friend, it's a thing.
Yep. Now, it's a thing in a theoretical intellectual exercise.
Yes.
So the briefest, summation of Operation Northwoods was a report put together by the Joint Chiefs, I believe, basically saying like, here's what would need to happen for us to be able to go to war with Cuba. And in this document prepared by our government, they basically like lay out like, okay, well, we need to like set off like attacks in these US cities and do this stuff. Basically, they are just saying we need a false flag. We're going to perpetrate the crime on our own people, blame Cuba, so we can then go to war with Cuba. So
you would hope that Northwoods was just an intellectual exercise.
Well,
but
who knows about the person that actually wrote it and signed off? But we will say it does make its way to President Kennedy, who quickly just goes, "Yeah, no."
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And then you have that whole Bay of Pigs thing. But it's
well, and actually, it was because some people say it's because of the Bay of Pigs that he is quick to dismiss this.
Yes, and I would
think he's quick to dismiss it because it's ridiculous.
It's ludicrous.
Because it is. It's exactly what the conspiracy theorists, as you said, think that like it's so easy for the powers that be to just like think in terms of loss of American life and murdering Americans for an agenda purpose. Like that's exactly what this document spells out.
Well, it's, again, and I know people are like, well, Denver and Matt, what are you guys saying here? And I think the fact is that America is not perfect. When you hear about things like Northwoods, but also when you go back to Bay of Pigs, or that false flags have been employed, not just by us, but by foreign powers and adversaries. It's very simple to make these leaps, these massive leaps into conspiracy theories like Pearl Harbor, like 9/11, right? Things like that. And I think that's the fight we're always going to have. I had somebody come into the distillery not too long ago and said, Denver, well, I'm inclined to believe you, but why should I believe you over Fox or over any of these other news organizations?
Yeah.
Why should I believe you when you tell me that January 6th was not actually planned by the FBI, which was the discussion?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, my goodness, Matt, where did I go? Right? We just went from Pearl Harbor to 9/11 to an inside job called January 6th. Now, all these linkages, as we're talking about the week of 9/11, the fact that I deployed, the fact that I was a senior technical advisor on the January 6th committee, the things that I'm doing now is, I'm going deep into data on things that are other types of, I would say, fabricated data or inserted data, as far as information warfare practices. We have this lineage of American false flag belief systems, of deep state and globalists, conspiracy theories, of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, of, all these things that seem to recreate themselves in another fashion. And I would humbly submit, Matt, that the difference right now is that alternate media and social media allows for a much larger metastasizing agent, even than World War II, even in 2001. And I think that's what bothers me. I think that's, again, why it's so important that we educate from history on through. We don't know everything, Matt. Obviously, I don't. But we can definitely, we're just smart enough. We're just above moron, where we can see, these connective tissue parts between World War II to today.
Yeah. And
mighty peculiar, just above moron.
just above moron. And you know what? Like, that's an admirable place to be, considering a lot of what's going on. And so, one last kind of parallel between the two that I want to touch upon: what happens to like everyday American life post Pearl Harbor and post 9/11 is also more similar than you would think. What we got was, the Patriot Act, right? We got a lot of things that became seen, justly or unjustly, depending on what you're talking about, as bending towards breaking some, civil liberties for citizens here at home. Well,
so I'm with you. I'm already tracking. Go ahead, my friend. Go ahead.
So post Pearl Harbor, again, we get a full mobilization, but we get things like the civilian defense, like the air raid side, where now we're recruiting civilians to be like on a war footing, watching the skies, right? But more importantly, we get the Office of War Information, which is the thing that is going to pour over movies and media and talk about how to like talk about the war. And this is a government office that is now definitely very heavy-handed in making sure that we stay as a country pro-war. And there's a lot of people that will say the Patriot Act, while targeted differently, was kind of had the similar motives. Like, you got to be, if you're not with us, you're against us. If it's, suddenly American flag T-shirts were really big in 2001 and 2002.
Your corollaries are fantastic. The analogy or the similarities, because you also had what happened to the Japanese during World War II.
Yes,
here in the United States. By 1947, we created the United States Air Force. You're talking about the migration to the CIA. You're talking about a much more powerful intelligence apparatus. When you're looking after 9/11, you are talking about the Patriot Act, but you're also talking about a massive investment in surveillance, which I was there, right? Yep. Massive, investment. You think about 2001, 2002, my immediate business partner by 2007 was actually tracking. He was in a shop called AQSL. Like, Denver, what does that mean? That's Al-Qaeda senior leadership tracking, right? So now you're talking about this massive, even at NSA, technological investment, Air Force, massive technological investment in targeting. I was there. I had the money, right? I personally briefed General Hayden in 2002 at the National Security Agency. I did. This guy, right? Based on some of the vulnerabilities we found in 9/11, but you're ready for this? The global war on terror. Operation Enduring Freedom, which is a direct reflection of 9/11, right? That is why OEF happened, was because of 9/11. Sorry, the similarities again are, we do react to this in a way as a country also that at the time could seem patriotic, could seem awesome, but there could be detriments long term, like TSA.
Right.
TSA. So you have all this happening, and boy, right? Look what we got going on now. After January 6th, look at the cascading effects of some one world government or deep state or globalist packed false flags. There is no way on earth the government can predict the cascading effects. The only way some crazy ass tinfoil wearing hat, right, mouth breather that loves to sniff glue could say that we knew the cascading effects is that all of it is bad.
Right.
And it's about controlling people. It's this socialist communist, overthrow of free institutions.
Yeah, it's that socialist, fascist, communist, weirdly left-wing, weirdly right-wing, weirdly whatever we need it to be thing that is here to like get its hooks into us and never let go. And which is why, of course, it all came so true, because after World War II, we were never like free again.
It's conspiracy theorists always try to explain away the fact that bad people do bad things, with worse people do worse things based on some massive strategic plan to destroy everything beautiful and lovely about us. And, and I would humbly submit, right, and I've said this before, fascism, communism, they meet at the same place. It's always autocracy. It's always control and power. So maybe people are just so goddamn afraid of a bad world, or they don't know how to actually wrap their minds around it, that they have to attribute conspiracy theories to it. and everything that they do. And I do feel bad for those people, because if you're always living in fantasy, how do you fight the facts of what's actually happening, which could be much worse than your conspiracy theories themselves? So
Yeah.
again, that's my my lesson for the day is don't let fantasy get in the way of facts, because while you're fighting smoke, somebody could be stabbing you in the kidneys.
Man, I love that. So, all right, just I have no eloquent like follow up to that. So I'm gonna say two very fast facts. One,
Okay.
When steel heats up, it doesn't have to melt; it can bend, and I mean that can still cause problems.
Yeah. Or
Okay.
actually, the heat could actually melt off the fire retardant from the metal itself because it's so hot. Because nobody had tested an airplane crashing into a building before.
I'm just gonna say, like, I don't need to totally liquefy to understand that a building could be compromised when it gets a little flexible. But two, just fun little postscript here to our John Thomas Flynn. So he would go on to, be a big time supporter of Senator McCarthy, the Joe McCarthy, not Eugene.
Makes sense. It makes sense.
And he would eventually pass away in a place called Amityville, New York.
My God, we've come. He's the one haunting the Amityville house.
It's been Flynn all along.
He's the goo on the walls.
You know what? If that liquid goo running down the Amityville walls was nothing but America.
When did he die in Amityville? When did he die? Do you remember the date he died in Amityville?
It was 1962.
So,
same year as North Woods.
That's right. Oh my! So 10 years later, what was Amityville again? It's the 74.
The actual it was 77. So yeah, but he's
Oh my God, it's him.
It's him. It's him.
John Thomas Flynn is the Amityville poltergeist.
And since we're in New York, near Amityville, how's Doug doing? There he is.
Man, you guys.
It's been a journey.
Yeah, it has, man. Yeah, this is a fantastic episode.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, great job by Matt on looking at Pearl Harbor. And, the thing is that I think we're to a point now, what are we on show? If we count all the live shows, 18, 19 weeks, maybe?
15?
We're on 15 of the actual
episode.
Yeah. So you're talking, I think we're seeing a trend, Doug. I think we're seeing a trend of we are in the fight of our life, I think, information wise. And I'm not trying to exaggerate, or overstate it, but when you're looking at 9/11 truthers or January 6 truthers now, but they're still out there. Antifa or FBI or CIA were behind it.
Some are still in
Congress. And the fact is, well, they're all right. It's amazing to me. I made that statement on TV. Like, when you look at the oversight and weaponization committees, most of those people voted to object to the electors. I mean, that's an indicator. But it's like John Thomas Flynn. We're talking about 9/11, people hooking on to Fahrenheit 9/11, which we know, though, that was sort of like a group start to that conspiracy theory. People who are self-identified engineers.
In that loose change business.
Loose change. You're exactly right. And then I know where the Antifa conspiracy started as far as Antifa or the FBI was I looked at it on the Mark Meadows text messages when Jason Miller said this would be a good way to message out of this. And then you see Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think not even an hour later, if I'm trying to remember the text chronology, saying it's Antifa. She's texting Mark Meadows. As Miller is texting Mark Meadows that Antifa needs to be the way to message out of this. Think about that, what I'm telling you all, how fast that actually got out to the far right media that day. Where you're talking about Matt Gaetz, or you're talking about, or that it was already part of the issue anyway.
And Matt Gaetz had it ready to go on the floor that night.
That night. And then, Louis Gohmert on the text messages said that the U.S. Capitol Police was telling him in real time that Antifa was actually behind it. Which is bullshit. Anyhow.
I've seen people who say they're members of Antifa, and they're mostly like grandmas. So I don't think they were the ones.
Right. Aren't they like 12 kids in Oregon? Like I never really seem to, see a lot of Antifa activity outside of Portland. But
I don't either.
I mean,
it's like it's a little gestation dish. But I think, well, listen, guys, I mean, when we're talking about January 6th, they wanted to admit to it. I mean, if you look at the Proud Boys Oath Keepers, they said, of course it wasn't Antifa. They don't have the guts. They're not as cool as us. And it's really hard to make money on the grift as somebody who, went into the Capitol. If you're blaming other people, you're collecting monies, right? That's part of your thing. If Trump wins, you got that stink on you of goodness that you helped overturn the election.
Well, we should honor the truthers of 9/11 in the sense that they are like the West End Blues, or the I Want to Hold Your Hand, or the Video Killed the Radio Star of internet conspiracies, right? Like they are the, it's 120 minutes broadcast of Smells Like Teen Spirit of internet conspiracy theories, right?
You're right.
It's
funny, but
it's true.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's true.
Now, I do have to announce that Matt and I are going to be discussing loose change on our first episode of The Unelectables, because I did curse that guy out on a podcast in 2007. And I'm trying to find the audio from it because it's glorious. But yeah,
I need to hear that. I need to hear that. The Unelectables, the best show ever.
Thank you.
So we're going to keep that soundbite and loop it to a techno beat. But
so I would like to add one thing. What you were kind of the whole idea of
add several. I've nowhere to be.
Oh, perfect. No, so I love the idea of the people that will say like, well, that wasn't the Proud Boys, that was Antifa. But then, so the people that are trying to say that aren't also equally saying then, so it was a bad, like, it was horrible. It was a horrible day and these need to be prosecuted. Right. It's like, they're still trying to be like, that was Antifa and it was nothing. And it's like, no. Like, you got it wrong. Like, if you're going to blame someone else, up the horror. Like, that's
but we already got into like the people listening and rooting for this already hold multiple conflicting ideas in their head at once. So that's how that happened.
Are you saying they might have something we've talked about before?
Yeah. What was it called again?
I think it was
cognitive dissonance.
I tell you, I'm so sick and tired of this show, Matt. You always trying to apply some type of consistency or intellectual integrity to an argument. I mean, at some point, I don't know. I mean, what's going on here, right? When you're talking about cognitive dissonance and you're saying, well, how can they hold these two thoughts in their heads? There's a couple ways to do it, right? Number one, right, is that they get off on inconsistency. I've said before that inconsistency is a feature, not a bug when it comes to conspiracy theories. It's how hard you get hit in the amygdala. The second thing is they're morons. So when you have those two things together, it's tough to use any type of consistent argument. It's easy to think. Sorry, I get very choked up about 9/11 truthers.
I'm like thinking the whole time, I'm going to have to cut that. Nope,
you got it.
No, well,
this is as close to live as we get.
Yep,
as we get. That's right. Well, the thing is that when you think about holding Proud Boys and Antifa in your head at the same time, or the FBI is behind Antifa, or the FBI is behind the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, it comes to people who just can't lever reality. And I think that's when I said in my first interview about this, like where I really tried to hit it home. I said, listen, you're arguing with people who think that Lord of the Rings is a documentary. And that is a difficult effing argument to have. Right. If you're arguing that Gollum isn't real and they're talking to you that they wish they were an orc. I mean, it's a really difficult thing to get to square. And I'm sort of not kidding.
No, you're not kidding. Just so you know, I'm laughing because it's too accurate. And like, and if I wasn't going to laugh about thinking that people think Lord of the Rings is a documentary, I'd have to cry about it. And right now I'm on camera. I choose to laugh about it, but please note these cameras go off and I am in tears.
Well, I know. As always, Denver, you can have my steel.
Oh shit!
So
Straight up
all right.
nerdism happening right here on the show.
Just for the
Around-
sake of we can't, because I can't not like say this little, like, it's almost like a stinger to the episode, if you will, but like, so I said about Operation Northwoods, which was basically the government creating a false flag and laying out how they would do it. It got to Kennedy. Kennedy just rejected it outright. So because the Kennedy assassination is the black hole in which all conspiracy theories go to like become other conspiracy theories and like contort and twist around, there is a significant amount of people who believe that it was his rejection of the false flag that is why he got assassinated a year later, which would line up so perfectly with the like QAnon now believe, the people that look at Kennedy and say that like he was like the president that stood against the deep state, despite the fact that he was like Kennedy. Like,
Right. You just hit it on the head. The new thing is Trump could be assassinated. You guys have seen that out there based on, the far right supporters. So I just wanted to let you know you're making another connection that's really applicable to today when you talk about what's happening. But here's what I would like to end with. Fantastic to put that together. What if you have a new Trump administration with those type of conspiratorial minds actually making decisions with the national defense apparatus? You now could have people who are already conspiratorial maybe making decisions on the line of Northwoods because you have that many batshit individuals that would be part of a new Trump administration. Now you've come full circle where you've gone from facts-based truth policy individuals who know that Lord of the Rings is an actual fiction thing. Right now you're going to a Lord of the Rings believes it's a documentary making the policies for the United States of America, which means we are in a conspiratorial loop at that time. And what happens to the sane when that happens?
And we know that there would be no fear of cognitive dissonance of being the people on the outside that decry everything as a false flag, then going on in the inside and willingly creating false flags. Like they would have no problem with that.
That's what scares me about stupid people.
Well, right now we're going to move on to a segment called The Mighty Peculiar Loves America. Matt, why do you love America this week?
Oh, man. Okay. So why do I love America this week? We did this once before, and I loved America because of comic books, because it was also just about the episode. But you know what? I'm going to love America this week kind of along the similar lines, but it is about the home front during World War II, actually. That piece of American history, the unity specifically of purpose that largely permeated the population. It's nice to know that was able to happen. Like we kind of talked about, I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but like there were super unpopular things like gas rationing. You had to have like a sticker on your car that said like how much gas you could get a month. You had ration books that you had to take to grocery stores for how much meat you could get, all of this stuff. And again, while you never want to paint with such a broad brush that like you say like everyone was on board, the point was there was a goal and a vision for what America needed to do. And on the whole, America did it. And in these days when people are still yelling at people for masks and like a vaccination that, was the way we got out of a crisis, that like that's still people are being punished for getting that. Like, I just like to think back to like those home front days of World War II and say, we could do great things.
Yeah.
And we did.
I like that answer. It's fantastic. How about
It's beautiful. Uplifting.
Yeah.
I tell you, after that, I think I can match it with the beauty and the love that I'm about to express to you right now, Doug and Matt. And why I love America is I love farmers markets. And I love the bands that play at farmers markets. And the fact is that I love music from sort of these under-talented, usually AARP card holding or tattered AARP card holding individuals, that are playing stand-up bass or a guitar that's out of tune. And
you're making fun of the Rolling Stones.
And what I love about it is that everybody's there and they love it. And it is so funny and so beautiful that what I love about America really are farmer markets bands. And the fact that they're out there playing as you're picking the juiciest cucumber, or you're looking at some baked goods that were gluten-free that weren't supposed to be. Those are the type of things that I love about America. Thank you.
I'm voting for Denver, just so you know.
I'm not even giving
vision
my
of America
answer.
I can get behind.
Well, you know what? I'm not even going to drop mine after that. I'll wait till the next one.
What? No, you gotta love America for a reason.
That was perfect.
Come on, Doug.
All right. What I love about America is the Coney Island Mermaid Parade, where everyone goes to the Coney Island Boardwalk, has a Nathan's hot dog and a whole lot of beer, and we all dress as mermen, mermaids, merpeople, sometimes scuba divers, sometimes sailors. And we go down there and we have a great time at the boardwalk, and that only happens here in America.
And I love America. I love America. If you think about Matt's uplifting message, Doug, the Mermaid Parade, and bad farmers market bands, what's better than America? Honestly, what's better than the U.S. of A.?
Exactly.
Rogue documentarians turning dumb ex-presidents into Ozymandias.
And with that, we love you all and thank you for joining the Mighty Peculiar.
Thank you, everyone.
Odd, strange, odd, strange.